Here's how to start a YouTube channel with your smartphone. This channel has passed 120,000 subscribers, and I now get over 12,000 views a day without ever having used a professional camera. And these days I even earn just about enough money to support myself from this channel. So in this video I'm going to talk about which smartphone to use, how to make the most of your location, composition, lighting, audio, video settings and more, so that you can get started growing your YouTube channel with your smartphone. When I started this channel, I decided not to buy a professional camera, and instead I just used the smartphone that I had at the time. And as well, my partner Andrea also started a YouTube channel using her smartphone, and it did really well. And then when she went on TikTok, that's when her channel really exploded. She's doing so well now, she even gets recognized in the street in Switzerland. And she's also just released her first book. And she did all this with a Samsung S21 Ultra. And you know what? You don't even need the latest flagship smartphone. So this is a Samsung Note 20 Ultra that I bought almost 3 years ago. And I must say that it has really great cameras that still hold up after all this time. But more recently, I got the iPhone 14 Pro, which is what I'm filming on now. And I've been using that mostly because it has a better quality front camera, and also it has cinematic mode, so I can get this nice blurry background. So I just mount it on a tripod with the front camera facing me, switch it to 4K, 30 frames per second, cinematic mode. But if you do use the front camera, you are going to need plenty of light. Now the question is, do you need a dedicated studio setup? Well, I don't have one, and neither does Andrea. So either I'm out in nature or I'm just using this living room. And this isn't even my living room, this is actually my parents' place, because actually I don't even have a place of my own at the moment. So my story is that at the end of 2019, I decided to let my place go in London. So I got rid of everything that I owned, apart from a few bits and pieces of memorabilia, and then I set off. But of course I did pick probably the worst time ever to become a digital nomad. Anyway, it's up to you whether you want to have a dedicated studio space to record your videos. But I do think that it is important to think about where you're going to film and how it's going to work for your channel. So if you are filming yourself talking to camera like this, just take a moment to think about where you're going to place yourself. Whatever the theme of your channel, I do suggest that you don't stand with the background too close behind you. And as well, make it interesting and sort of aesthetically pleasing. So you can see, like, this is just a door. It looks a bit weird. It's very dark. Lighting's terrible. The framing is ugly. So you can really improve the look of your video just by getting busy shooting and editing. And that's why from day one of my 9-day course, you will be doing just that. There's no hours and hours of boring lessons on theory and camera settings. I just tell you in a very simple way which shots make you look like an amateur and which shots turn you into a professional. Lesson by lesson, there will be just the right amount of technical knowledge to allow your filmmaking creativity to flow. As well, if you need it, I will be there to give you feedback via Patreon or via our Discord server for members. So in this room, I always place myself so that there's a good distance between me and the wall in the background. So I think this wall is kind of interesting enough. And as well, with the cinematic mode, it's a little bit blurred out, so it's not too distracting either. They say that running a restaurant is 50% food and 50% theatre. You know, it's a performance and the scenery has to be right as well. You know, you might have the most delicious food, but if there's grease dripping down the walls, people aren't going to stick around. Well, unless they stick to the walls. The point is to pay some attention to how your scene looks. Is it inviting? Does it sell the channel? Or is it going to put people off? Running a YouTube channel is in some ways like bringing people into your house. I'm kind of literally doing it here. This is my home. And you know, when you have guests around, really the more warm and cozy your house is, the more likely your guests are going to want to stay. And of course, the way the YouTube algorithm works, the longer they stay, the more views you get. Once you have the scene right, think about the composition. So normally when we're filming this kind of talking to camera stuff, we place the person talking right in the middle of the frame. Use the grid and place the subject's eyes on the top horizontal line. Symmetry is quite a safe bet if you put the subject in the middle and then a balanced background either side. You can also place subjects on the left and right vertical lines of the grid. So I could stand there, eyes level with that line. This might be useful if you wanted to place some kind of graphics or text on this side of the frame. And sometimes people like to talk off camera, as if they're talking to an interviewer. That was a little bit of a trend on YouTube for a while, but I haven't seen many people do that anymore. It's a little bit impersonal, whereas, if you talk directly to the camera, it's like you're talking to the viewer directly. One of the most important aspects of creating beautiful, professional looking video is lighting. So I guess we need a professional lighting setup, don't we? I could recommend to you to buy some $300 lighting rig, and then I could get some extra pocket money from the affiliate links. But the truth is, I never use a lighting rig. So in this room, I place the tripod deliberately by the window, so I can use the natural light. If I'm outside, there's going to be natural light as well. Of course, this does mean that I'm kind of restricted to filming during the daylight hours. But personally, I actually prefer the natural daylight look to the artificial light look. So, I'm using a smartphone, which has the great advantage of portability. Personally, I choose not to negate that advantage by buying a huge cumbersome lighting setup. So Andrea did actually buy a stand and a ring light when she started her YouTube channel. And you can place it just behind your smartphone, and it's going to give you a nice, soft, flattering light. So why do we need soft light? For shooting the best quality video, soft, diffused light is the most flattering and it's easier on your camera's sensor. Hard light is when the light shines directly from the light or the sun directly onto the subject and the scene. And the problem is that it causes deep dark shadows, which is going to exaggerate any wrinkles. And like I say, it's much more challenging for your camera's sensor. Soft light is when the light shines onto your scene indirectly. So for example, the sun coming directly through the window is hard light. But if it has to bounce around outside first and then come through the window, then it's soft light. Indirect light is known as diffused light because the light gets scattered all around and it's not coming in a straight line. And for photography purposes, there are filters and there are reflectors which you can use to diffuse hard light. So if you do get a light, I recommend that you get one which has a diffuser as part of it, like the one that Andrea has. You can see that the plastic that goes over the light is kind of opaque, and that's what diffuses the light. There are YouTubers who are going to suggest to you that you get kind of big lights, but then you're going to have to buy all these extra things like a softbox or reflectors and all kinds of extras. So it's fine if you've got a big studio to set it all up in, but like I say, it's sort of negating one of the great advantages that you have shooting with a smartphone. And I do think that it's basically overkill. So there are actually natural diffusion filters, and they're called clouds. But if you're filming outside and there aren't any clouds, then just try to find shade for your subject. So if you're going to use the spoken voice in your videos, which is basically like 99.9% of all successful YouTube channels, then obviously great audio is going to be essential. Just like having a nice, inviting, warm, friendly scene, having high quality audio also encourages people to stick around. So there's basically two factors which affect the quality of your audio: the environment and the microphone. And both are actually equally important. In fact, I'd argue that the environment is even more important than the microphone, because in the wrong environment, you could have like a $2,000 microphone and it's still going to sound bad. The best environment for recording audio is one where there's minimal reflective surfaces and obviously minimal background noise. A room with curtains and sofas and carpets is going to be better than one with hard floors and no soft furniture and like shutters on the windows, because reflections that are basically known as echo really do have a negative effect on your audio. And as well, wind blowing on the microphone is of course going to completely destroy it. In fact, outside can be one of the best places to record audio because you don't have any reflections. The sound just flies off into the air and it doesn't bounce back. most advice has been that you need to have an external mic to record audio. And people will say that the mic in your smartphone just isn't good enough. But that's actually not entirely true now, especially with modern flagship devices, which now have these great microphones and computational processors which actually remove some of the noise and the reflections from the audio. In fact, one of the big advantages that smartphones have over mirrorless or DSLR cameras is that they have much better quality inbuilt microphones. I have a confession to make. You can see that I was using the Rode Wireless Go 2 system to record the audio. The thing is, I ended up not using it. Why? Well, what happened was a couple of the files stopped halfway through, even though I could see clearly on the video that the blue light was flashing, so it should have been recording audio. Somehow it didn't end up on my laptop. Who knows why? So really my only option was to redo those parts that had the missing audio. Or maybe not, because what I actually ended up doing was using the audio from the iPhone and then enhancing it using Adobe's new AI audio enhancer. So I will talk about that a little bit later, but I just wanted you to know that this audio actually comes from the smartphone and not the Rode. Get on with it! In the right conditions, you might find that your smartphone's inbuilt mic does a better job than a cheap clip-on mic. So for example, I found that with my iPhone 14 Pro, outside, as long as there's no wind, I actually get a really nice sound. So if you're outside and it's too bright, what do? That's right, you put some sunglasses on. Inside it's not so great. As well, the further that you stand from the phone, the worse the sound is going to be. So apart from the inbuilt mic of your smartphone, there's basically 3 types of external microphone that you can use. So you've got the clip-on mic, there's the shotgun mic, and also there's those kind of podcast mics that people put on the desk in front of them. And they do seem to be quite popular these days, especially if you're doing a lot of talking to camera stuff. So personally, I generally use the clip-on mic when I'm doing talking to camera, and then I use my Sennheiser 416 shotgun mic for doing voiceover work. There's also cheaper wireless microphones designed specifically for use with Android and iPhone devices, like the one from Filmmaker, which I made a whole video about recently. So if you're interested in that, you can check out that video. Okay, let's talk about that Adobe AI audio enhancer. So this is something that is changing the way that we record audio in 2023. So I've been using it on and off for the last few months, and it really is a bit of a game changer. And I've noticed that other YouTubers and TikTokers are starting to use it too. So Adobe have released a beta of this AI audio enhancer. So all you do is upload your file, wait a few minutes, and it's going to convert it to make it sound as if you recorded it in a studio setup. So this means you can take your iPhone's echoey audio and Adobe's audio enhancer is going to transform it. Now it is in beta, so it's not 100% reliable. You might find that if the audio was particularly bad that you uploaded, that you might get it back with some glitches in it. So you do need to log in to use this system, but I don't think you need to pay anything. So you just have to have an Adobe account. In this case, I haven't actually used it raw. I've done some mixing with it. I don't want to make this video into a audio mixing tutorial, but I've made a step-by-step lesson explaining exactly how to do this for members on Patreon. Okay, so finally, let's talk about recording video on your smartphone. A standard camera tripod with a clamp for your smartphone is a pretty essential piece of kit for recording talking to camera videos. So I've actually got these 2 Andua tripods, and I find them to be really useful. The small one is also very light, folds up pretty small, but both of them have this extending central pole, which you can turn 90 degrees, and then you can use it to record straight down onto a table. So that's pretty useful if you're doing things like handicrafts or you just want to show something that you're doing with your hands. And the smaller one is pretty light and portable. So this is the one that I take with me when I'm filming outside. So of course, if you're filming solo, one of the big challenges is to monitor the camera so that you can be in the frame and at the same time see what the frame looks like. Are you in focus? Is your head cut off? So if you get these things wrong, your footage might be unusable. So without a second person operating the camera, how do we go about monitoring ourselves? Well, first up, if you're looking to buy a smartphone to use for filming yourself for YouTube, look for a smartphone which has a very good quality front selfie camera, because obviously being able to film yourself with the front camera makes it a lot easier to monitor yourself, as I am doing now. So I do find that the iPhone 14 Pro has a really good front camera. It has cinematic mode, you can record 4K, you can record 24, 30, 60, 25 frames per second. But on the other hand, the main camera of your device will almost certainly be better quality. It's going to be better in low light conditions, and it's usually going to give you some natural shallow depth of field, so you'll get some blurry background. So whether you use the front or the rear cameras, it really depends on the lighting conditions. If you find that the front camera of your device is good enough, just go ahead and use that. Before I had the iPhone 14 Pro, like I say, I was using my Samsung Note 20 Ultra, but because the front camera wasn't really that good quality, I always filmed myself with the main camera. And I generally found that the easiest way to frame myself was just to do a test shot and then stop, go around, check to see how I'm framed, and then reposition myself if need be. So I might need to angle it slightly differently, or I might need to stand further back or closer. So it can be helpful just to place a little marker on the floor so that you know where to stand. One other option is to place a mirror behind the smartphone, so you can see yourself in the mirror and then frame yourself that way. By the way, Samsungs can be voice activated. Probably other smartphones do this as well, but I know that my Samsung does it. So all you do, you set it up to record, and then you just say record video, and it will start recording. Record video. And as well, you can use a palm gesture to start recording. But unfortunately, you can only use gestures with the selfie camera. As well, you can do this with your iPhone. First, you're going to need to enable voice control. Go to Settings, Accessibility, then Enable Voice Control. Because you might not know this, but if you have your camera app open on your iPhone, the volume buttons will act as shutter buttons or record buttons. So once you've enabled voice control, the phrase that you want to use is turn up the volume. So with iPhone, you can actually stop it recording as well. You just have to use the same phrase again, turn up the volume. So this means that we can start and stop recording without touching the screen or without moving. So another way that you can monitor your phone's screen is to use screen mirroring. Your iPhone screen can be mirrored onto an Apple Watch or an iPad or some other Mac computer. And as well, you can do the same thing with a Samsung to, various devices. So I'm not going to list every device here, but there is a good chance that your smartphone can be mirrored onto another device. And as well, there are some third-party camera apps that allow you to do mirroring. For example, Filmmaker Pro has an accompanying app called Filmmaking Remote. So if you have two devices, like you could have two smartphones, they do have to be the same system. For example, an iPhone to an iPad or an iPhone to another iPhone. Or you can do Android to Android. As well, pro take for iOS, if you have a copy of the app on two different iOS devices, you can also mirror the screen of your phone. And finally, another option is to buy a monitor and connect it directly to your device. So, camera settings. Obviously, this is a huge subject and I don't have time to cover it all here, but I do cover it in other videos on my channel, and as well, I have in-depth lessons for members on my Patreon. But I will just quickly go over settings here for iPhone and Android. So when you master a video, it obviously has to be mastered in one single frame rate. The most common option is to choose 30 frames per second. If you want the film look, you need to choose 24 frames per second. And for high detail, it's kind of a video game look, you could choose 60 frames per second. But that is pretty rare, and most people choose either 24 or 30 frames per second. So while you can only master your video at one frame rate, you can actually record video at different frame rates. You can choose 24, 30 and 60 frames per second, and they could all fit into one timeline using one frame rate. You can also shoot 1 frame per second, or 2 frames per second, or 1 frame every 5 seconds, and that would be time lapse or hyperlapse or motion lapse. But most of the time when I'm recording myself talking to the camera, I record at 4K and 30 frames per second. And I nearly always use autofocus and auto exposure. So right now it's on this autofocus, auto exposure. But with cinematic mode, which is what I'm using now, of course you can adjust the focus later. So that means that you don't have to worry about getting your phone in focus. And I would say that, most smartphones now have very good focus. They have very good face detection focus. So if you do want manual exposure and focus control on your iPhone, then you're going to have to use a third-party app like Filmmaker Pro, or there's many others. But most Androids, like my Samsung, has Pro mode, which allows you to set shutter speed, ISO, white balance, and focus manually. So like I say, when I'm filming myself with the iPhone, most of the time I pretty much always use cinematic mode. This helps to separate me from the background. And actually a lot of new flagship Android devices, they also have something similar. Maybe it's called portrait mode or something, or portrait for video, and it's usually pretty effective in the top range devices. So that's how to record yourself talking to camera. But what about B-roll? So apart from shots where you're talking to camera, you might need some B-roll footage. So this is footage that is going to illustrate what you're talking about, or it's just going to make your video more engaging. You might have a 5-second break between chapters, or an exciting intro, or you just want to break things up so it's not always just this same shot for the whole video. But it does depend on your channel and the audience that you are making your videos for. So when I'm filming B-roll, I will quite often also set my camera to autofocus and auto exposure, but it does depend on the shot. If I want slow motion, for example, in 4K, then I don't use slow motion mode. What I do is just switch to 60 frames per second, and then when I come to edit, I will slow that clip down either 50% or 40%. So if my timeline is 30 frames per second, then I will slow down 60 frames per second, 50%, and it will be 50% of the speed. So like I say, this allows me to shoot at 4K, because if I choose the slow motion mode, I'm going to be limited to 1080p, or even lower on some devices. So sometimes when I'm shooting B-roll, I will lock exposure and focus just by long pressing on the screen. It's very quick, so it just really depends on the shot. If it looks better with everything locked, then I do that. Now when it comes to grading, I don't shoot in log or any of that kind of stuff. It just takes too long. And for YouTube, like I say, you just want to be creating content. You don't want to be spending hours messing about with log footage. When I come to grading, I just make some minor adjustments. I try to do as much as I can in camera. If you get exposure right and you've gotten some nice, interesting shots for B-roll, for example, you don't really need to add too much grading. If you got the time, then spend 5 hours shooting, editing, and developing an interesting story. Once you start making videos for your channel, how do you get people to watch them? I mean, of course, we all have different ideas of what success looks like. I mean, the truth is there's some fantastically produced channels that look absolutely amazing, but they just get a trickle of views. Despite what the YouTube gurus tell you, there isn't really a magical formula that's going to guarantee you views. And there's no real secret hack either. And that's why in my new podcast for members on Patreon, I talk about how I grew this channel, and I also go through the basics of how the YouTube algorithm works. And knowing that kind of knowledge can really save you an awful lot of time. Before I started this channel, I actually created a blog and got it up to 2,000 views a day. And before that, Andrea and I used social media to fund a film festival. And even before that, I used social media to meet the targets of over a dozen crowdfunding campaigns. So this channel, it wasn't really a fluke. I'd actually had years of experience working with social media. And so I use certain skills and strategies to boost my chance of success with this channel. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video that I see you in.